This is Ben Cohn, the ice cream guy, and you're listening to my hero, Ralph Nader, the Ralph Nader Radio Hour.
Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. My name is Steve Scrovan, along with my co-host David Feldman. Hello, David.
Hello, Steve.
And our producer, Hannah Feldman. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Steve.
And, of course, the man of the hour, Ralph Nader. Hello, Ralph.
Hey, everybody.
Now, Ralph, as we record this, we are in the midst of a government shutdown. What do you make of this, both politically and practically?
It's really strange because what the Democrats are demanding in order to continue funding the government is an end to the ban that the Republicans passed a few months ago on the subsidies for Obamacare. That's 25 million people who, if those subsidies are ended by January, their premiums are going to spike sky high. The other thing they're demanding is that the Republicans rescind the depletion of Medicaid, where anywhere from 10 to 15 million people are going to lose their Medicaid. Now, the irony of this is that in the 2026 election, those are the two major attacks that the Democrats are readying to defeat the Republicans. And now they're saying to the Republicans, we want you to do the right thing, and we will, in effect, lose the opportunity to go after you on very popular issues that can make you lose elections. And the GOP, taking orders from the deranged Trump, are basically demanding that the end of these subsidies and the deprivation of Medicare to millions of Americans, even though it's going to be devastating for them in the 2026 election. How about that? Millions of people losing their Medicaid.
Yes, so we'll see how that plays out in the days and weeks to come. But as far as today's program goes, first up, we're going to talk about how weaponized disinformation poses an existential threat to humanity with Dr. Michael E. Mann. Dr. Mann is a climatologist, presidential distinguished professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania, and the co-author with Dr. Peter Hotez of the new book, Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. We'll speak to Dr. Mann about his book, which he says is a, quote, a call to arms and a roadmap for dismantling the forces of anti-science. Amidst the ever-changing news cycle, it's hard to keep up with all the ways the Trump administration is dismantling the government. One agency that so far has seemed untouchable, no matter which party holds power, is Social Security. In the second half of the program, we welcome the former governor of Maryland, Martin O'Malley, who served as the commissioner of the Social Security Administration in the Biden administration. We all pay into Social Security, and 40% of seniors living alone depend entirely on Social Security. Elon Musk's so-called government efficiency task force has driven more employees out of the Social Security agency at a time when its staffing had already been reduced to a 50-year low. Governor O'Malley is going to give us his take on what he believes the future holds for Social Security under Trump. So far, doesn't sound like efficiency. As always, somewhere in the middle, we'll check in with our tireless corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber. But first, Michael Mann is here to inoculate us against the anti-science virus of weaponized disinformation. David?
Dr. Michael E. Mann is Presidential Distinguished Professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Pennsylvania. He is a co-founder of the award-winning science website realclimate.org, and he is author of more than 200 peer-reviewed and edited publications, numerous op-eds and commentaries, and 7 books, including Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. He co-authored it with Dr. Peter Hotez. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Dr. Michael E. Mann.
Oh, thanks so much, David. It's great to be with you all.
Welcome indeed, Mike. I want our listeners to consider 2 frames of reference while we interview Professor Mann. People have experienced the COVID pandemic, the SARS pandemic. They've experienced hyper hurricanes and unparalleled wildfires and heat waves and sea level rises. So we're not talking about science in the abstract. We're not even talking about basic science in contrast to applied science. We're talking about a body of knowledge that covers perceived impacts that are killing people in this country and around the world day after day. A recent report just came out that the smoke from the huge fires, such as coming from Canada, take about 40,000 lives in our country alone through respiratory ailments. That's about how many are killed on the highway. That's the first frame of reference. And the second one, when you listen to Professor Mann, ask yourself, how many of these threats, how many of these unmerited assaults on people who are standing up for empirical reality would be possible if anonymity was banned on the internet, something which Zuckerberg and others have opposed because they want more traffic on the internet. Okay, with that background, Mike, lay the basis, first of all, for the perils that are now more than approaching. They're in our midst in terms of climate and pandemics.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ralph, if I may. It's just an honor to be speaking with you, especially about this topic, because I know you've done so much work over the years in trying to communicate the existential environmental threats that we face today. And we communicate against this stiff headwind of an anti-science movement that is promoted by petrostates and polluters and plutocrats and all of the bad actors that, of course, you've spent your career sort of singling out appropriately. And in this case, this misinformation, this disinformation is deadly, as you allude to. The wildfire smoke, and there's mortality associated with that, these unprecedented wildfires that are a result of human-caused warming of the planet from fossil fuel burning. And there is a direct connection. We can now say that many of these extreme events simply wouldn't be occurring, certainly wouldn't be as extreme as they are in the absence of the warming of the planet. So you've got this fundamental threat to human health, this source of mortality in climate change, and also in the extraction and burning of fossil fuels themselves, the air and water pollution that by some estimates is responsible for as much as 20% of all premature deaths. And so we're talking about a major source of mortality here. Then, of course, you've got pandemics and anti-science, an ideologically motivated anti-science movement to convince people to not vaccinate, to get them to oppose vaccination, to get them to reject the messaging coming from our leading public health scientists like my co-author Peter Hotez. So that's another existential threat. Climate crisis. Got the threat of ever more deadly pandemics due in substantial part to climate change and environmental disruption. And then the third in that three-legged stool, the third threat, which is the greatest threat of all, and you've alluded to it, is the unprecedented massive promotion of disinformation by bad actors who have weaponized our social media platforms to promote anti-science messaging on climate or vaccines for purely ideological reasons. And there is this infrastructure that is created that supports that disinformation machine. And it's the five actors that we talk about, the five forces that threaten our world: the plutocrats, the petrostates, the polluters, the propagandists, and yes, the press. Not all media outlets, but many of them, including even what we used to think of as sort of legacy objective news outlets like the New York Times and the Washington Post, which too often engage in what we call performative neutrality, where anti-science positions are put on an equal footing or placed on an equal footing with the overwhelming consensus of the world's scientists. So the public is confused. They don't know whom to believe. And of course, that plays to the interests of these bad actors who benefit from business as usual, fossil fuel burning, and all of these other activities that are threatening the planet.
Mike, talk about ExxonMobil scientists in the early 1980s.
Yeah, thanks for that question. There's a memo from 1982. It was an internal report from ExxonMobil's own scientists, which made a prediction of how much the planet would warm. A little over 1 degree Celsius, a little less than 2 degrees Fahrenheit, warming of the planet that would occur if we continued to burn fossil fuels at sort of historical business as usual rates. So they predicted where those CO2 concentrations would be today in a scenario of inaction, in a scenario of business as usual. And they accurately predicted how much the planet would warm up. But they didn't stop there. There's a line in that report, and I'll remind you, this isn't Al Gore. This isn't the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This isn't me. This is ExxonMobil's own scientists who warned of potentially catastrophic events that would be occurring now in that scenario. And what are we seeing? We are seeing those catastrophic events. These super typhoons and hurricanes, there are two of them in the Atlantic right now as we speak, are becoming more powerful, are becoming more destructive. The impacts of climate change aren't subtle anymore. They are taking a toll in the damage that they are causing and in the mortality that they're responsible for. And that's where we are. And we're there because of this disinformation machine that we need to find a way, as you say, we need to find a way to reassert the will of the people.
Listeners, Professor Mann is not predicting perfection in terms of science. There have been many scientifically established principles in the past that have been discredited by subsequent science.
Absolutely.
So there's always a skepticism there. We're talking about tens of millions of people back home who suffer the indiscriminate impact of climate and pandemic. Conservatives, liberals all get affected. There are floods in North Carolina affected a huge area of pro-Trump territory and families recently from a hyper hurricane. So if the Congress was controlled by the people in their own self-interest, and of course their own self-interest is in preventing and mitigating pandemics and climate catastrophe, which is rooted in scientific facts, as well as their own daily experience when they're hit by these forces. Don't you think these 5 Ps, as you call them, the plutocrats, the petrostates, the pros, the propagandists, and press, would have far, far less impact? And shouldn't the laser beam effort of all our marches, reports, rallies, strikes, litigation, zero in on those 535 people?
Yeah, no question about it. And I should say that petrostates was really a stand-in for some of these other things we're talking about, polluters and politicians who essentially are collaborators with the petrostate. And the United States now, given its policies that are essentially dictated by the fossil fuel industry, must be classified, as we argue in the book, as a petrostate. And its enablers, the enablers of that petrostate are the politicians who are rubber stamping Trump's agenda, and the polluters, who obviously are essentially writing the agenda. Project 2025 was written by the Heritage Foundation, funded by the Koch brothers, polluters. And so you're absolutely right. And what's so ironic, what's so tragic, I should say, is that they have been so effective, these 5 bad actors, in convincing the public to vote against its own interests. That has been the defining source of our problem today. The fact that with the massive propaganda machine they have, Murdoch media empire, Fox News, Wall Street Journal editorial pages, Elon Musk's weaponization now of Twitter to promote right-wing talking points and ideology, they have essentially been able to convince people that up is down, black is white, and climate change is a hoax, as our president literally said a week ago to the UN General Assembly, and vaccines, are dangerous. Ralph, you may have known the great Carl Sagan.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, he presaged this in his great book, came out in 1997, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark. And there's an amazing passage from that book, which I often quote, where he presages, a world where people fall into superstition, become unable to understand the technology that determines their lives, resort to pseudoscience and superstition. I would argue he didn't focus as much as he might have on anti-science, not just pseudoscience, but ideologically motivated anti-science. But he did warn us that we were headed down a path of destruction, a threat to human civilization. And we're at that moment. We're in the moment that he predicted, and we're at a pivot point. And the only way that we will be able to preserve, as far as I can see, anything that resembles modern human civilization is if the people take back the power that they have under the Constitution. It remains to be seen if that happens here, because we are at the precipice now where our democracy is literally crumbling before us. In the time that we've been talking, I'm sure there is another headline in the news that underscores literally the disintegration of all of our democratic institutions, all of the guardrails that have kept us in check for so long seem to be coming down and doing so very rapidly. And so we are at a moment of crisis, and only by taking back our politics, by the people taking back their politics, as you say, can we avert catastrophe.
And I always say to our listeners, it's a lot easier than we think. I've written a book called Breaking Through Power. It's a lot easier than we think. 1% of the people organized in congressional districts reflecting public opinion and public anxiety, fears, and necessities for a safe and healthful life. I find a couple useful distinctions here. Maybe you can help us elaborate it. It is not just an anti-science movement. It's a corporate science, anti-academic science movement. Corporate science, like Monsanto reflects, is not peer-reviewed. It is secretive and is driven by profit, and it's made to obey political goals in Washington and state capitals. Academic science, in principle, is peer-reviewed, it's open, it is designed to perform in the public service and interest, and it always is open to revision. And in recent decades, corporate science over universities has undermined academic science, co-opted it, tempted it, and in many universities like MIT and Harvard and Berkeley has become a dominant in-campus presence. Could you elaborate on that? I find that much more useful pro and con way to analyze it than simply using the words anti-science.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's why we really try to underscore, we're talking about ideologically motivated anti-science. It isn't the sort of pseudoscience that Sagan was so concerned about, people falling victim to faith healers and crystal healing and horoscopes. He was focused on that, but you've put your finger on it. The real threat, and Carl saw it, but I don't think he saw it quite as clearly as he would now if he were still with us. The problem is ideologically motivated anti-science, where there is an ideological, political, financial agenda behind the effort to discredit science. And we've seen, the origins. The playbook was written by the tobacco industry. One of the lines in an internal document that was released, and you'll note the similarity with the internal fossil fuel documents from ExxonMobil that we talked about, that secretly they knew there was a problem. Their own scientists knew there was a problem, and they hid it. And instead, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars promoting misinformation, attacking independent scientists, doing everything they could to cloud the public understanding and prevent a policy action. But that playbook goes back to the tobacco industry. And there's a line from one of the documents they had to release in response to a settlement with a number of states' attorneys generals back in the 1990s. Doubt is our product. That's from a tobacco industry internal memo. Doubt is our product. And what they meant was the most important thing for them, for their business model, was to cloud the public understanding of the threat that is posed by their product. And it's the same playbook that all of these other players have been using, as you note. And it's interesting to ask, well, what about this sort of anti-vax, the public health anti-science that we see now as so pervasive among conservatives, among the Republican Party? Why are they opposed to vaccines? Why are they opposed to, what our public health experts say about these pandemics and how we can protect ourselves from them? And it goes back to the fact that early on, the Koch brothers, two of the plutocrats who funded much of that infrastructure that has been attacking climate action for decades, they were concerned about the effect that lockdowns would have on fossil fuel usage. They didn't want lockdowns, stay-at-home orders. They wanted to keep the oil flowing. They wanted to keep the fossil fuels burning. They're the world's largest privately held fossil fuel interest, but they also fund a larger libertarian ideological sort of agenda. And so they created organizations, front groups. They even bought off leading, quote unquote, medical experts to convince the public that these actions weren't necessary. And they created this rabble, this sector now of our population that has been weaponized to oppose all messaging from the public health scientists, which of course means opposing vaccinations. And these vaccines are part of big government just telling you what you can and can't do. It fit in neatly to their narrative, the same narrative they use on climate change. Oh, these politicians, they just want to tell you, they want to prevent you from eating your hamburger or flying to see grandma, for the holidays. They're going to take away your liberty. They're going to take away your freedom. And that's the larger framing into which this folded in. And so it became this behemoth, this anti-science behemoth that couples opposition to climate action and opposition to vaccines, all as part of sowing distrust in the scientists whose message is often inconvenient to these powerful interests. So you put your finger on it. It isn't anti-science in a vacuum. It's anti-science with a clear ideological agenda, a plutocrat, petrostate-driven ideological agenda.
And commercial profit, of course. It's very important to distinguish between quackery, pure quackery on the fringes that gets a foothold among sometimes millions of people, and corporate science, which is the dominant form of anti-science in the pursuit of profit. And not only that, they shut up people, they file suits against academics like you, they file frivolous lawsuits against farmers who speak out. So it's good to do that. Go into your criticism of Zuckerberg, the social media, and AI. Where does all this fit?
Yeah, we call it anti-social media in the book because that's what it really is now. And it has been, whether it's Zuckerberg and Facebook, which has been weaponized by bad actors, and the rules have been set in a way that allows the bad actors to exploit that medium. Let's make no mistake about it. There's a reason that Mark Zuckerberg funds a front group called the American Edge Project. So there's literally lobbying for legislation that would prevent any common sense regulation of these social media platforms. Elon Musk, of course, having bought Twitter, and he bought it so that it could be weaponized for the bad actors that helped leverage that purchase. Saudi Arabia and Russia, two leading petrostates. You think it's a coincidence that they helped fund Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, which has now been completely weaponized? He's changed the algorithm to promote right-wing propaganda and anti-science on climate, on vaccines, and everything else.
Talk about anonymity. What if anonymity was prohibited on the internet as proposed by Professor Robert Felmuth, University of San Diego Law School, who's been on this program talking about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because too many bad actors are able to hide behind anonymity, and so much of the disinformation that we're talking about is actually promoted by what are sometimes called inauthentic accounts. What does that mean? They're professional troll farms, and some of them are connected to petrostates like Russia. They are bot armies. Literally, they're AI bots that have been programmed to spew misinformation, disinformation, propaganda. And that can only happen, that has taken hold because the rules allow that. And one of the ways to rein that in, as you say, would be to sort of lift this veil of anonymity that protects too many of these inauthentic actors on social media. There are all these common sense things that we could do to try to rein in social media, to regulate them in the same way that we would regulate traditional media outlets. And yet they have used their great wealth and power to lobby against any and all legislation. Right now, the reins of our entire communication infrastructure are in the hands of these bad actors, which own all three branches of the federal government right now and have weaponized all three branches to promote their agenda.
There are a lot of bright spots around the world. The drawdown program that Paul Hawken launched, the fiercely competitive renewable energy industry, which is spreading in red states at a fast pace. Texas is the biggest producer of wind power. Talk about the bright spots, the civic action, as well as the economic superiority of these alternative systems that would undermine the fossil fuel industry.
Thanks for asking about that, Ralph, because it's easy to get very depressed when we talk about all the threats and challenges that we face here. It feels monumental. We feel powerless. And one of the points that I've made over and over again is that doomism and despair plays right into the agenda of the bad actors. They want you to give up. They want you to feel overwhelmed, like there's nothing you can do about it. And so it's so critical for us to recognize that while there is great urgency, with respect to the crises that we face, this is so important, and it's what you're saying. There's also agency. We have the ability to change this. We still have the ability to avert truly catastrophic climate change if we act, and we act with dispatch. And the obstacles, they're not physical. They are not technological. Again, as the polluters would like you to think, as the bad actors would like you to think, we have the technology to decarbonize our global energy infrastructure. The only obstacle are political, and political obstacles can be overcome. And people need to be thinking about that in the lead up to this midterm election, which may be our last available effort to steer this ship, to right the path of this ship that we're on. And so there is still an ability to make a difference. And there are some reasons for cautious optimism when you step back and you direct your gaze away from the United States. You look at what's happening writ large in the world. You look at what's happening in China. I just returned from a trip to Hong Kong, and I was made more optimistic about the experiences I had there, the people that I spoke with, the students that I lectured to. And some of it is the underlying Buddhist philosophy that I think still sort of infuses the way China looks at these global problems. They care about climate change. They are the leading actor now in the world. They're the largest carbon polluter, but they're taking action to reduce their carbon emissions, to move dramatically away from fossil fuels. The US has contributed far more cumulative carbon pollution to the atmosphere than any other country. That's really important because that's all the climate cares about. People like to finger point at China, which currently is the largest emitter because they industrialized much later than the United States, right? More than a century later. But their trajectory is actually a downward trajectory. They've contributed far less carbon pollution to the atmosphere than we have, and they're taking greater action. And, to the extent that they become the world leader, they are sort of positioning themselves, to the extent they're becoming the leader in decarbonization and the move towards renewable energy and flooding the global marketplace with lower cost solar panels and wind turbines because of their manufacturing of the renewable energy infrastructure. The United States doesn't get to determine the future course of human civilization at this point. It's going to be the rest of the world. All the United States gets to determine is whether it's going to be on the front line of the clean energy transition, the great sort of economic development of this century, whether they're going to be on board or left behind. And right now, with the policies of the Trump administration and congressional Republicans and a Supreme Court that is enabling them, we are quickly ceding that ground. We are quickly ceding our economic competitiveness in the world to China and other countries. And so I'm optimistic that the world will tackle the great problems we face. I'm less optimistic that the United States is going to be part of the solution unless we turn things around very quickly. And that's why we have to change the whole political environment so that there is room, even for energy companies saying, you know what, we see the future. We are going to fall behind. The US is going to fall behind the rest of the world because, the Stone Age didn't end for want of stones. And the fossil fuel age won't end for want of fossil fuels. It'll end because we've found something better. And those that recognize that, those countries like China that recognize that are going to prosper. Those that don't, like the US right now, are going to fall behind.
We've been speaking with Professor Michael Mann, University of Pennsylvania, co-author with Peter Hotez of the new book, Science Under Siege, How to Fight the 5 Most Powerful Forces That Threaten Our World. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Ralph. It was truly a pleasure.
We've been speaking with Dr. Michael E. Mann. We will link to his work at ralphnaderradiohour.com. Up next, the Trump administration is sticking its grubby little fingers into the Social Security Administration. But first, let's check in with our corporate crime reporter, Russell Mokhiber.
From the National Press Building in Washington, D.C., this is your Corporate Crime Reporter Morning Minute for Friday, October 3, 2025. I'm Russell Mokhiber. Becky McLean is a molecular biologist who worked at Pfizer for 10 years. McLean raised urgent alarms about biosafety lapses at her biotech lab at Pfizer. McLean's warnings about dangerous genetically engineered viruses that were handled without following standard safety protocols were met with hostility, intimidation, and ultimately devastating illness after a workplace exposure changed her life forever. Now she's documented her fight for justice in a new book, Exposed. A Pfizer scientist battles corruption, lies, and betrayal and becomes a biohazard whistleblower. For the Corporate Crime Reporter, I'm Russell Mokhiber.
Thank you, Russell. Welcome back to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan, along with David Feldman, Hannah, and Ralph. How much damage can Donald Trump do to our most durable and dependable government program, Social Security? David?
Governor Martin O'Malley served as commissioner of the Social Security Administration from December 20th, 2023 to November 29th, 2024. He previously served as governor of Maryland from 2007 to 2015, following 2 terms as mayor of the city of Baltimore. Welcome to the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, Governor Martin O'Malley.
Hey, thank you. It's a great honor to be with you. And Mr. Nader, Ralph, it's good to talk with you again, my friend. And thank you for all that you do to give us courage and hope that we're going to come through these dark times if we keep putting one foot in front of the other. So thanks for having me. Glad to be here and talk about Social Security for a little bit.
Well, you're the leading spokesperson on preserving Social Security, expanding benefits frozen after 40 years, and focusing on the devastating staff cuts that have reduced the service capabilities when people call Social Security on the phone or try to go to a Social Security office, which has been depleted of the necessary workers. So tell us the current predicament of the Social Security agency in terms of its ability to recover from the Trump slashing and cutting.
Yeah, this can almost be likened to a Jenga tower. You know, the game where you try to pull out as many logs as you can without toppling it over. The Doge boys, and from the articles I've read, most of the people that were sent to Social Security with their chainsaws to reduce the staff there to critical, subcritical levels were men. And so here's a fundamental problem. When I was asked to go there, it was after 10 years of House Republicans, in essence, driving their staffing to a 50-year low, even as baby boomers of my generation swelled their ranks every single day to a new all-time high. And now, with those going in, cutting at least 12%, I think actually the numbers are greater than that. The place has become a bit like the hermit kingdom. We find out what's actually happening inside only when people quit in disgust. So these guys have put benefits at risk in a way that hasn't happened in the 90-year history of this agency. And in fact, this very month is going to be the first time that Social Security stops sending out paper checks to beneficiaries who have earned those benefits. Now, we may say, oh, it's just a small percentage of the 70 million who receive benefits every month. But if you're one of the 700,000, many of them homeless or living in areas of our cities or our countryside that don't have, ready availability to some of the banking services we take for granted, that can be a rock your world event. So what we're going to see this month, if they go through with it, will be the biggest interruption of benefits in the history of the program. But my deeper concern is that even broader benefit interruptions are coming. And that's not just me who says that. I mean, I've been in touch with a lot of the systems people there, and they're all amazed that the dedicated women and men who have refused to quit keep it going. So the agency, as President Biden said in one of his very first talks as a full-fledged citizen again, he said they're trying to wreck its reputation, wreck its customer service, so then they can rob it. And the one thing they've already succeeded in robbing, 2 things now, is the peace of mind that people had that every month that direct deposit or that check would be there. And the second thing they've robbed in the greatest theft of personal data in United States history is all of our personal data and records when the Doge team made a copy and took into their own personal cloud all of our data.
On the paper check elimination of the monthly Social Security benefit, don't they exempt people at a higher age level? Can there be a waiver?
It used to be. They're saying now you have to go apply for that waiver. And if you're an 89 or 92-year-old individual, good luck navigating what is now an even tougher website to navigate with its double encrypted stand on your head, gargle peanut butter, spit nickels to prove you are who you are in order to get the waiver to keep getting your paper check. So they're saying you have to apply for a waiver, Ralph. But look, walk into any field office in America. You will see that 10 windows and only 3 people behind the windows that are open. And that's because of the meat cleaver they've taken to the staffing there.
You can't do a waiver online?
You could, but as I say, let's say you're homeless and you go through and try to prove who you are. My own 22-year-old son, a digital native, tried to get something as simple as a new Social Security card for a new job he had, where they told him he had to have one of those. He got tossed out when he was trying to get in there 3 different times because they said, we don't have your name living at the address you say that where you live. So there was an article recently about this. A lot of people who are homeless continue to get those paper checks delivered at a homeless services place that helps them with that process. So yeah, technically, conceptually, they're supposedly able to apply for a waiver. And good luck if they can get it. And maybe they will get a waiver. Or maybe they'll get somebody that they love to go set up a bank account for them and do all the direct deposit stuff and execute the legal authority so a person can do that as their guardian. But we're talking about 700,000 people. And the more they chip away, the more they learn what they can get away with without public blowback. And that's what we've seen these guys doing. When there's public blowback, they take a step back, but they haven't taken a step back from this suspension of 700,000 checks.
Let me quote something for our listeners in a report that's just coming out this month by academic researchers. Quote, respondents overwhelmingly reported that compounding administrative breakdowns, loss of staff with specialized knowledge, rapidly changing policies, significantly worse processing delays, more frequent errors with emails and faxes routinely lost, have made even basic tasks impossible, end quote, said Katie Savin, the lead author, assistant professor at California State University, Sacramento. She continues, quote, the results are devastating consequences to claimants who've experienced hunger, eviction, and loss of health care as a result, end quote, because they rely so much on the Social Security check for the basic necessities of life. Now, why isn't AARP more vigorous here? They have chapters all over the country, millions of people. Why aren't they more vigorous in Congress and on the executive branch?
Yeah, that's a very good question. They put out some things, but I think none of us can be too vigorous when it comes to pushing back against these guys. The question you just asked was a question I heard Elizabeth Warren ask in another setting. It is the most popular program in America, second highest level of trust among the American people in terms of federal agencies, behind only the National Park Service and Smokey the Bear. So the numbers are out there. I've found myself, Ralph, kind of in this role, being the most recently serving confirmed commissioner, the first Democrat, by the way, confirmed since 1997, ringing the alarm and waking up the democracy. The good news is they're awake, but we really could use AARP to ring that bell louder.
Let's talk about John Larson's determination as chairman of the Social Security Subcommittee of the House Ways and Means Committee. In 2022, he introduced a bill that would increase frozen Social Security benefits that have been frozen for over 40 years and pay for it by increasing the cap of income that can be subjected to Social Security tax. He had 200 Democrats supporting him, and he wanted the bill to go out of House Ways and Means to the floor for a vote.
John Larson has been a great champion of Social Security. I've done a ton of town halls out there, more than I can count, and people often ask, why is it that a family making $170,000 pays as the same roughly $10,000 into Social Security on their income as a single guy making $170 million pays into Social Security? That's not fair. That doesn't make any sense. And the only percentage of the public that benefits from that cap to which Social Security is applied is about 6% of us who make more than $170,000. So the long term, whether we're talking customer service, Ralph, or we're talking the long-term ability of Social Security to keep pace with the cost of living and to pay 100% benefits, what is called the misnomer sometimes, I think, of solvency, but the long-term fiscal health and its current customer service woes are absolutely solvable problems. And in terms of the long-term health, we need to ask wealthier people to continue to pay in.
Well, some listeners may be asking, when is Social Security going to start paying out more than it's getting in and having to reduce benefits in the monthly check? Right now, I think it's 2033. Give us your view on this.
Sure. Yeah, let me unpack that a little bit. We have all seen, and your listeners have all seen, because nothing draws more eyeballs to click on a story and read the advertising than a scary headline that says Social Security to run totally dry by 2033. But that's not true. What they're talking about is a surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund intentionally built up since the last congressional adjustment in 1983 that was designed to be drawn down during this time when that big demographic of the baby boomer bubble is going through their retirement years. And so that's what has been happening. In other words, the year I was there, Social Security had paid into it by Americans working in the economy 1.3 trillion. Social Security paid out 1.4 trillion. Where did the difference come from? That 100 billion? That was drawn down from that surplus intentionally built up, which has now been drawn down to 2.6 trillion. And it is true that that is scheduled, that surplus, to be depleted in 2033, at which time Social Security, by current projections, would only be able to pay 83% of benefits. Now, we can't make light of that 17% haircut for people, as you mentioned, that live entirely and depend entirely on Social Security to keep themselves out of poverty or from living under a bridge. That would be a life-rocking moment. So that's the reality of what's happening here. And the way to fix that is actually pretty straightforward. And it's what the actuaries have been underscoring for years, which is you need to require that wealthier people give up their current windfall of not paying another dime into Social Security after their first 170,000. Not right, not fair. The general public supports that adjustment, and Congress needs to do it.
Well, Trump is always lying about Social Security. Here are two of them. He said, quote, I signed one big, beautiful bill and allowed no tax on Social Security for our great seniors, end quote. It's a complete lie that Social Security benefits are taxed. The second lie is that he said, quote, I made a sacred pledge to our seniors that I would always protect Social Security, and under this administration, we're keeping that promise and strengthening Social Security for generations to come, end quote. That is false. Another lie is that undocumented immigrants are getting Social Security benefits. They are paying in, if they have a job, into the Social Security fund, but they are not getting benefits under the law. That's prohibited. Your comments?
Yeah, all of those things. I mean, once they got rid of the heads of all of the offices of inspectors general, they started launching these big lies. And you recited a few of them. There's others as well, like the lie that there are 12 million dead people that continue to receive checks. And as Trump said himself to Congress, some of them are as much as 300 years old, which would have had them here for the founding of Jamestown. That's not true either. So let me unpack them quickly. On the zombie apocalypse, 12 million people receiving benefits, not true. Social Security is electronically notified by every vital statistics office in every state in the union as soon as a death certificate is recorded. It is an infinitesimally small number. In the latest OIG's report in March of 2023, I believe it was 7,000 people who continued to receive checks after they died. And most of that was unavoidable because of people pass away in the same week that they're in the pay cycle, but we still recover that in probate. The second big lie about the illegal immigrants, and this was a big one, Ralph, all over the swing states, people were being pounded by jumbo postcards in the campaign saying that Donald Trump is going to protect Social Security because Kamala Harris is letting illegal immigrants milk it dry. The truth is, illegal immigrants, so-called undocumented people working here, can't receive any Social Security benefits, but they contribute $26 billion a year for the rest of us that they will never see a dime of. The other big lie you mentioned about strengthening it for all time, the biggest waste in modern times that happened at Social Security occurred when DOJ told everybody who was retirement eligible that if you leave right now, we will pay you for the rest of the calendar year, provided you just leave. No telework, no knowledge transfer, just get out and we'll pay you for the rest of the year. The other one you mentioned was about doing away with taxes on Social Security. very unpopular among the American people that any of their benefits should ever be taxed. But it is true that if you make enough to pay taxes, to pay income tax, the portion of your income that came from Social Security will be a part of that. And that portion goes back into the Social Security Trust Fund. And that continues to this day. But he created a short-term temporary increased exemption amount for that some seniors are able to avail themselves of if they make that income. But another big lie is that it's riddled with waste, fraud, and abuse. Totally untrue. The percentage of improper payments, waste, fraud combined, that's overpayments, underpayments, mistakes, and fraud, amounts to less than 0.3% of benefits. So those are some of the big lies that are told about Social Security. And someone at these town halls, people sometimes say to me, well, what's the end game here? What are they after? And I believe, and John Larson believes, and others in Congress believe, just like the guy who was asked, why do you rob banks? He said that's where the money is. Social Security is the only agency that runs currently a $2.6 trillion surplus. And I do believe that they want their hands on that. And in fact, Treasury Secretary Bessent even said that the baby bonds that they inserted, what they call the Trump baby benefits, that they inserted into the big, beautiful bill for billionaires, he said that was a backdoor way for them to ultimately privatize Social Security. So they want the cash. They've never liked the program. And they've been more successful than any other Republican administration at going after it with a meat cleaver.
Well, Jeff Sommer, the business columnist for the New York Times, wrote an amazing article the other day where he said, putting on a piece of paper all the assets people have, their stocks, their savings, their home, that Social Security is by far the greatest economic asset of the vast majority of the American people when you project it over time.
If we're going to save Social Security, we need to keep the people motivated. I mean, this is a democracy moment. Until we win back the House, you can put as much pressure as you like on House members. It's going to be tough for Congress to put the brakes on it. But those Republican members in closed doors absolutely, positively do talk with each other, and they compare notes on how many calls they're getting about Social Security and the other programs. And Social Security remains one of the top 3 negatives for Donald Trump right now, is his messing with and undermining confidence in Social Security.
We've been talking with Martin O'Malley, former governor of Maryland, former mayor of Baltimore, and former commissioner of the Social Security Administration. Let's go to Steve.
Governor O'Malley, back in 2004, at the beginning of George W. Bush's second term, that was one of his primary objectives, which was to privatize Social Security. Everybody would have their own private IRA. And he did not get very far with that. If he had gotten that through, what would have been the consequences come the 2008 Great Recession? What kind of havoc would that have wreaked on people's private Social Security?
Yeah, well, if the market collapsed and everything was in the market, that would have been a disaster. Congress made a decision, and you can argue with it. And some people have said, oh, maybe we should diversify part of that Social Security surplus so it might get a higher rate of return. I mean, I was governor. Our state pension funds are partly invested in stock market and others in more conservative instruments, investments like treasury bonds. Congress made a decision that all of it should be in treasury bonds because it's the safest. It might have a more conservative yield, but backed by the full faith and credit of the United States of America, that it will always be there. I believe Nancy Pelosi kind of drove George Bush's proposal into the sea when he attempted to do that to Social Security. But Steve, many of the things that in the past we thought were third rails appear not to be a third rail at all to these cats. So all of that specter has come back. And it would not surprise me at all. It would be shocking and unsurprising at the same time if we learned that the Trump administration wants part of Social Security surplus to be invested in Bitcoin.
Just for listeners who may not know this, Martin, tell them who else gets Social Security benefits besides retirees in their 60s.
Yeah, it is a little known fact, but Social Security lifts more kids out of poverty than virtually any other program in America. So we're talking about children whose parents have earned their coverage by working the requisite number of quarters and If they pass and they leave their children here, it's a lot of orphaned kids are helped by Social Security. There are a lot of people with some severe disabilities from childhood who child supplemental security income. So there's a lot of people. It's not just seniors, it's people with disabilities, and it's a lot of kids that are helped by Social Security, as well as, widows. When a spouse passes, there's a widow's benefit as well.
Hannah?
Governor O'Malley, Senator Gary Peters recently co-authored a report from the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs that talks about how DOGE is, I'll say, mishandling our data. And there's a big old section about Social Security. Could you talk a bit about how DOGE is handling our Social Security data?
Yeah, and interestingly, at every town hall I do, usually this is one of the top 3 questions that people from the audience will ask after my initial opening. And that is, why are they going after our personal data? Social Security and the IRS are the 2 treasure troves, if you will, of personal data in the United States government. In fact, the very first regulation passed by what was then the Social Security Board in 1935 was to protect everyone's personal data, their earnings data from the first job you and I have ever had. Social Security keeps track of an enormous amount of data. And as soon as the DOGE team rolled in, they wanted to get their hands on it. In fact, the acting commissioner, true to her oath, true to laws like the Privacy Act and the Federal Information Security Management Act, when she was told that she needed to open all of our data to the DOGE team, she resigned rather than follow that order. But once they put their own puppet commissioner in, he opened it up totally. And very recently, it was revealed that the DOGE team, over the pushback of career professionals, made a copy of the entire Numident database, your data, my data, earnings, and put that copy into their own private personal cloud that only they can access. This probably, if this were a law school bar exam question, you'd get a lot of points for dinging off the dozen or more federal statutes that this violates. But the question remains, what is it that they're trying to do with it? And that article by Senator Peters was outstanding in calling it like it is. And we know for a fact that one of the things they did with it initially was, and they bragged about this, they said, we are going to terminate the financial lives of anyone that has overstayed their visa. So they declared 6,100 people, at least 6,100 people dead when, in point of fact, they were not dead. But by so doing, they were able to make it impossible for them to bank. If you are declared dead, and what a horrible name, but Congress gave it to it, in the master death file, which Social Security keeps for all of the other agencies, the other people that pay off of that are banking institutions. So as soon as someone is marked as dead in Social Security's database, their bank account gets shut down. People can't access it. It messes with your credit. That's one thing we've known that they've done with it. But the other sinister thing here is that there's a couple other reasons why they might have taken it. One of them is to be able to sell it to whomever they want, or to just let their friends use it. We've heard and read the stories about Palantir wanting to create a master database of all Americans, something that when Nixon was doing the same thing to target enemies, Congress prohibited. And another thing they might be doing with it is building a different platform for the payment of benefits and using this treasure trove of data to test against that platform. So once they wreck the existing system, surprise, surprise, one of their buddies will be the only one with a proprietary platform that in an emergency situation can step up and yes, oh, by the way, make a sweet buck sending us benefit payments that Uncle Sam used to do without charging us for that function for the last 90 years. So that's what's happened. It's the biggest theft of data in U.S. history.
Well, we're out of time. We've been speaking with Martin O'Malley, former governor of Maryland, former mayor of Baltimore, and recently former Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. Can you give your contact websites slowly for our listeners to get more information about what you and your colleagues are doing all over the country to inform people and get them active?
Sure, Ralph, thank you. My leadership website is called Win Back Our Country. Or if you were to simply Google Martin O'Malley, Social Security, it would probably take you there as well. And I've laid out in there the rebuttals, refutations, the truth that allows you to return to your own table of democracy at home, at work, with your brother-in-law that only listens to the Fox. So it has plain language rebuttals to the falsehoods that are being told about Social Security, and it also has hyperlinks and authoritative sites so that you can defend this program. It's really up to the people to defend Social Security right now. These guys are going after it. They're going after it fast, and they're bold in their thefts and the destruction of your customer service. So people need to step up. And then thank you, Ralph, for highlighting this important issue. Beats the hell out of me why it is that some elected Democrats get so bored with the two-word Social Security, because I believe these next midterms are going to turn on this issue.
Especially when the checks stop being sent or there's a real delay, they'll hear an uproar for sure. I want to thank you too, Martin, because not many people who leave government continue as active citizens around the country. And there have been a lot of people fired by Trump from all kinds of agencies and departments who have just sort of retired or taken another job in industry and commerce. But you're continuing battling for it, and I'm glad you're a collaborator with my own Congressman, John Larson.
Yeah, great guy. Great guy. Well, thank you, man. That means a lot to me. You're a giant to me and one of my great American heroes. So thank you for that.
I want to thank our guests again, Dr. Michael E. Mann and Governor Martin O'Malley. Those of you listening on the radio, that's our show. For you podcast listeners, stay tuned for some bonus material we call the Wrap-Up, featuring Francesco DeSantis with In Case You Haven't Heard. A transcript of this program will appear on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour Substack site soon after the episode is posted.
The producers of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour are Jimmy Lee Wirt, Hannah Feldman, and Matthew Marin. Our executive producer is Alan Minsky.
Our theme music, Stand Up, Rise Up, was written and performed by Kemp Harris. Our proofreader is Elizabeth Solomon.
Join us next week on the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, listeners.
Step up. You know what's right and you know what's wrong. Rise up. Don't let the system hold you down. Stand up. Stand up. You've been sitting way too long. Well. Say you're tired of trying. You say we have no choice. Say you're just one person, and who will hear your voice?